Public Sector Leadership, a conversational series, examining and anticipating under the microscope and through the telescope. In this expert roundtable, the Employment Rights Act. Under consideration, public sector leadership and the legislative landscape. Workforce well-being, HR in the spotlight, cultural transformation, compliance, capacity and change. And to start our conversation, Atlanta, I'm hoping you can help me just by giving me a little bit of an overview of what's in the pipeline, what's coming our way, what are these changes in legislation and how are they going to affect us?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of upcoming changes following the new Act. There's been quite a lot of monumental shift on some of the things, such as the unfair dismissal rule. I think that's going to be a big one that we'll need to focus on and prepare really well for. We've got the new family leave rights that are being implemented from this month, along with a lot of other things that will be coming a lot later in the year. So we've had some already implemented, we've got some implemented from April this month and again from October in this year. And then looking further ahead, there'll be a lot more changes coming next year as well.
So we've got a timeline for that change. We've got significant rights and alterations in the ways in which people are being employed.
Yeah.
Hayley, tell me more.
I think just touching on what Atlanta said with that preparation, I think the preparation is what's key. So we're seeing, particularly sort of with our education clients, we're doing that training and not just understanding and having that knowledge of what's changing, but also how that applies in practice, like looking at those sort of case-based scenario training so that managers, leaders can really understand the impact and what they need to be doing in preparation for those changes.
And both of you are approaching this from a legal solicitor perspective with clear understanding of those changes. But my guess is that not everybody who is going to have to implement those changes knows about how they're going to do it, what they're going to do. And I know, Steve, you've got some real insights on this. You've been looking into in some detail whether or not public sector organisations are ready for the consequences. Tell us more.
Yeah, so we've drawn together a study from two sides of perspective really. So from the senior leadership within public sector organisations, but also within the workforce as well, because obviously their anticipation of the changes that are going to come in and their expectations are going to be significant as well. And to do that, we conducted a poll of 500 public sector senior leaders and 3,000 workers.
So this is spread across the country then?
Yeah, these are nationally representative polls. So the leaders are within the public sector, the workforce has public sector, but also some private sector in there as well, to give us the balance. And what we found was that there was a broad degree of confidence about how these things were going to be implemented. You mentioned timeline earlier. It's probably important to state that this study was done during August, September. So again, this was a few months ago in terms of the preparation, and a lot has happened since then in terms of the movement around what's being introduced and when it's going to be introduced. But by and large, around 69% of public sector leaders were saying they were confident that they were going to be able to implement whatever came through with the Act successfully, and that they were able to do so with the current skills and capabilities that they've got. So that's reasonably high. It's not overwhelming.
No, it leaves me with a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of concern.
Yeah. And what was really interesting is that certainty dropped the nearer to the person who's going to be implementing it. So one of the questions we asked was to what extent did they feel comfortable with the implementation without further support from government, either from budget or training. Chief execs and directors, 82% of them were saying, yes, we don't need any more help, we'll be fine. Heads of HR, around 50% said they were not confident unless they got more training, more advice, more support.
And that would be the case studies that we've already heard about, for example.
And there were a few gaps that came through. I mean, one of the things at the time, and again, this may have changed since, is that a lot of people within the leadership were saying they were really getting a lot of their information about what the changes were going to be through the media rather than through detailed briefings. And there's probably good reasons for that in terms of the changes that have taken place from the bill to the Act. But that sort of confidence as well was different between different types of organisations. It's easy to think of the public sector as just one type of organisation, but it's not. Lots of different sizes, lots of different budgetary levels, lots of different resource levels. So the smaller an organisation was, the more nervous it was. But there was real optimism ahead of the changes coming through as well. There was definite support for the intent and the potential that the Act was going to bring from employers and employees. And it seems that there's a potential bigger win here. So rather than it be seen just as a matter of technical compliance, it's actually the start of what could be a really strong cultural shift towards a fairer and better workplace, which is important for everyone involved in the whole process. So it is momentous and significant, but it's still, I think people are slightly waiting with anticipation as to how it's going to then all play through.
Now, some of those numbers are really kind of quite intriguing. They probably say a lot about the different roles people have, and if you are, as you've said, if you're closer to the point of implementation where the interpretation and the consequences are on your plate, then you're going to need to be more ready than the person who perhaps is overseeing. Now, Andy, you've got particular professional expertise, and I'm just wondering whether your background helps to shed some light on what Steve has just said, whether it resonates.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm delighted, first of all, you came to Hayley in Atlanta with the legal questions, because I've got a clue about any of that. Right? So I spent the last 20 years looking at positive psychology, the science of human flourishing, so how people can come alive within an organisational structure. And I think, in terms of what Steve said, I'm one of the people who picks up the new legislative stuff from the media, so I'm not an expert in it. So, and the media, we like a panic on the media, don't we? We like to, it's all changing and everybody panic. And I think that maybe for me as a non-legal person, is the new legislation doesn't seem to make it harder to run a business. It makes it harder to run a bad business, I think, is in terms of what I mean by that is, you can't hide behind processes anymore. It's about how we treat people day to day, which is essentially what you're saying, yeah. And I think it's, therefore, because of what I know, I would like to study it away from legislation towards sort of leadership and culture, which is where Steve came in on that. I think good organisations won't notice a massive difference, but the rest will. That's the thing. And however people find out about it, it's about what are we going to do about it, how to create an organisational culture that is alive and buzzing and vibrant. And therefore, that's what we all want. That's what the employer and the employee both want. I'm
guessing that you would say, and we'll probably come back to this later, the effective implementation of these changes, if it's done as a pursuit of compliance, you're not necessarily going to reap the full rewards of the opportunity.
No, I think it's a well-known adage. People don't leave organisations; they leave managers, don't they? And I think that's broadly true. So I think getting the management right, getting, like you say, creating a culture that is rocking and rolling. But that's the hard. I've been to so many organisations over the last 20 years to deliver training. And the organisation can get you halfway there. So I've walked into places where there's a ping pong table, there's a pool table, there's a kitchen, there's free coffee, there's a fridge full of Coca-Cola. It's all free. And yet still in that jaw-dropping environment, still some people will turn up rolling their eyes and being negative. So the organisation can only get you halfway there to create a culture that's rocking and rolling. There seems to be something that the employee needs to bring their best self as well. And I think sometimes that's the missing bit.
I love your descriptive words, Andy. Let's go to North Yorkshire. Trudy, talk to me about your understanding of why this represents a challenge. What are the barriers? Because we're hearing from Andy that if we get it right, it's going to be fabulous. We're hearing from Steve that people think they can probably get it right, but they aren't certain. We know from Hayley in Atlanta that there's some real technical stuff that's got to be good. But I'm just interested in what's got to change and what are those barriers to change?
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of change in the policies and procedures in the background. As the public sector, we will have the policy changes that come through, but we can't rely upon that. We're not an organisation that want to be that compliant. We do want to be compliant, not that way. We don't want to be, you've got to comply by the policy. It's actually about changing that culture with our managers. You're right, it's that, how do managers lead? How do they manage their staff? And the day one rights and making sure we're a good organisation anyway, North Yorkshire Council, as well as many of the local government and public sector. So lots of these policies and practices are there anyway. It's about getting our managers in that right space to manage staff from day one, that engagement, onboarding, managing performance, managing absence in a way that they should be managing it proactively, so that actually you don't have to fall back on that.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Trudy. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm really interested. Do you think it's harder to get that change in managerial behaviour than it is to get the compliance?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So where should we focus our efforts?
I think it's about the training and support to managers.
Okay.
About the tools that they have available and not having to pick up a policy and going, right, I've got to do A, B and C. It's about how they day to day live and breathe and manage their staff automatically.
Yeah.
So for somebody who's delivering some of that training, what does it look like? What would you want effective workplace training to look like for this?
And I think Trudy's just really touched upon that. It's giving those managers those tools to use. So rather than having lengthy policy documents that they've got to try and get their heads around and understand, it's having those sort of checklists, flowcharts, prompts, so that when they're there making those decisions, they feel confident in what they're doing. So you're moving away from that sort of reactive decision making, which again can feel stressful, anxious, to a more sort of thoughtful judgments being made, and that's that build up of confidence allowing that to happen.
Can you give me a specific example of a situation where a manager would be better equipped in this change period with a flowchart, something that really nails it for me?
Yeah, so I think where Trudy said one of the biggest changes is the changes we've got to unfair dismissal. So we've got the reduction in the qualifying period, so it's going from 2 years to 6 months. So there's going to be a big emphasis now on managing probationary periods, right? Performance reviews during that time to make sure if someone maybe isn't working how they want them to in that period, that you're reviewing that, taking action on that. So having that sort of flow charts, prompt sheets on that probation is what we're going to see that's going to really help into how to manage.
And having a clear timeline for the
Exactly.
manager from the day of recruitment onwards.
Yeah, exactly. So that they can see when that should be reviewed. So exactly that, they're making that decision within that time span.
And Atlanta, what are the areas that you think are going to require the greatest level of focus? We've got this legislative change, so we've heard about unfair dismissal claims, period for that. Where else do we need to look for new flowcharts, new advice, make sure our managers are on board?
I think from a generic perspective, we're looking at extended time limits for tribunal claims now. So the time limit is actually extending from 3 months to 6 months, which gives claimants a lot more time to prepare a claim and bring it to the tribunal. There's also an extension on ACAS's early conciliation period. So we could be looking at 9 months before an employee knows that a claim's even been brought against them. So I think we need to focus on documentation, being consistent with record keeping and keeping it for a certain amount of time. Like I say, it could be up to 9 months before we know of a claim. So it's about making sure that we've got everything documented for the correct period of time and being able to recall those when we need them if there is a claim that eventually comes through.
So we've got some training requirements, we've got cultural shift, we've also, by the sounds of it, got some systems thinking that needs to go in as well in terms of making sure, whether it's record keeping, whether it's communication. This is all strong stuff. Now, Andy, where do you sit in terms of that form of training that is most effective in bringing about habit change?
Yeah, well, in terms of positive psychology, I flipped it away from looking at what's wrong with people to what's right with people, basically. So looking at how you can turn up as this fabled best self. We all talk about it, but very few people are actually living it. And with that, I don't want to sort of cast aspersions over any organisation, but sometimes the organisation can get in the way of that. So people want to rock up as their best self. If they're not being listened to, they're buzzing with great ideas, nobody's asking them, they're underpaid, they're overworked, then their mojo can slip very quickly. And in my world, there's a difference between, we've always measured employee satisfaction, in fact customer satisfaction as well. And if you think about that word satisfaction, it's a very low bar. So if you went on holiday and I said, how was your holiday? It was satisfactory. I'm not going to go there, yeah? Or if there was you went for a meal, how was your meal out last night? Yeah, it was satisfactory. Very low bar. So what I'm interested in is engagement, which is much more connotated with vigour and wanting to be there, being invested in your workplace. And that, I would say, is less about, I don't want to get too eye-rolly and putting leaders through legislative changes and where they've got to tick a box and they've got to learn this and what qualified period is this and that. That's going to switch them off completely. I think it's really about actually falling back in love with Mondays. That's really where we're coming from. Is that if we can get that bit right, if your staff can genuinely rock up feeling engaged, and in fact, if we could just go back to, like, if I do work in early years, so I work across the all the way from 5-year-olds all the way up to boardroom level, and early years teachers always learn this very first week. They think they will learn is that children don't learn unless they can tick 2 boxes: am I safe and am I loved? If kids can't tick those boxes, their brains are in fight or flight and they won't learn. But we never extrapolate that out. If you extrapolate that out to the public sector or adults, I think it's not a million miles away. If your employees, at North Yorkshire can turn up and tick 2 boxes, am I safe and am I loved? Love might be too far, but does some work value me as a person? Then I think that they will rock up engaged, and you won't have to fall back on the legislative procedures because it's a great working environment. In fact, I was delighted in the questionnaire that was I had a quick look through some of the questions. Loved one of the questions. I nearly spat my tea out when I read it because I was so delighted.
This is in the wellbeing survey.
This is in the survey, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
I've been feeling loved. I was like, how fantastic is that, right? Because I might say the actual language of love appears in the questionnaire, which was a total joy to me, because I do think that I was just having a chat before the cameras rolled with Trudy about being through massive change at North Yorkshire and merging 8 councils into 1 council. I think on the change, if the Richter scale needle of earthquakes measured change, we're in a world that and I think therefore I'm not feeling safe in that environment. Actually, I'm feeling like my job's under threat. I'm feeling overworked, and I'm certainly sometimes not feeling loved. So I think it's less about the flowcharts and the tick boxes and more about the environment that we can create. And I would say it starts with leaders, but it's not exclusively about leaders. Have this conversation with my customers. Where does change start? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? And I describe it as inside out. It's switching people on to actually, we've got one go at life. We spend 30% of our life at work. Why would you turn up being anything less than your best self?
Now, some of what you've said will probably cause some people some disquiet.
Yep.
And
Yes.
the reason for that is clearly there is a compliance imperative here.
Yes.
You can't be in a position where your procedures aren't holding up with the changes in legislation. But you're also suggesting there's an opportunity, and Trudy, I'm going to come to you on this. I'm just wondering whether you see the pathway to change, because previously I asked you about barriers, whether you see that pathway to change as something that is an opportunity to begin to move somewhere near the picture Andy is painting, or do you see it more as something where you've just got to get this right because rightness is what matters?
I think it's that balance, isn't it? So we need the procedures in the background, we need the governance, we need the compliance. So if it gets to that stage, managers know what they're doing, HR can support, solicitors, etc. So we need to be at that stage. I think it is an opportunity now to kind of reset some of that relationship, reset the kind of values and behaviours and how managers and staff are engaging. So we don't get to the point where we need to invoke the policy, because actually it should be you're turning up, you're being your best self, you're doing a great job, you're performing, you're doing what's asked for you, you know why you're showing up, you've got that value, you trust the organisation, those 2 tick boxes you've said from kind of early years. So I think it is an opportunity to flip it a little bit. But that said, as especially in local government, public sector, we need the policies there. We need to be able to equip the managers that if individuals don't turn up and do what they need to do, etc., how do we support them through that and do it?
And sorry to jump in, I think where I've mentioned those sort of frameworks, I see them as no, Andy's I've
got no problem with the framework.
What I do is I see them as tools to support the managers.
Yeah.
So it is a form of support to help them, their well-being, and then them feeling confident to be able to make those decisions.
And I imagine that in workplaces, I'm going to just come across to you, Atlanta. I imagine that in workplaces where things go wrong, and this is under previous legislation as much as the new, A lot of that is because people haven't gone to the policy soon enough. I imagine then that quite often when it goes wrong, and in organisations where employment rights become a real issue, it's because however good or bad those managers are, they just haven't gone to the policies soon enough.
Yeah, possibly. I think it's important to look at it from higher up as well. So just touching on the training point as well. I think training's really important because the policies can exist and the policies can be perfect, but we need to make sure that staff know where the policies are, they know how to access them when they need to be familiar with them before they even come into play, like Trudy says. Yeah. The training needs to be tailored to each organisation and the different levels within that organisation. So looking at managers, more junior staff who might have different duties in relation to different aspects of their role. So yeah, you can have a perfect policy, but it may not be that they're always being followed correctly or even accessed properly.
So I'm seeing in my mind that the scale and nature of the change here needs to be much richer than just that rewriting of policies or checklists. It's going beyond the training. It is cultural.